Hello children, hope you are all doing very well at your places. Today I'll be explaining section 1 of Unit 3. Name of the lesson is Poor George and the author of the lesson is Angela Mary Calabrese. So this lesson, Poor George, is about a very young, a little boy who is not at all interested in studies. He doesn't find studies as very interesting and he's not interested. So how he gets encouraged by his teacher Mrs. Jima, and by showing his hidden talent, how he becomes a popular person among his fellow mates, that's the story about. So let's know about the author before going to the lesson. Angela Mary is a renowned author of many interesting stories. She gives a vivid insight into the reader's mind that encourages the reader to read on with the same enthusiasm throughout the story. So Angela Mary is quite a popular author. She has written many interesting stories and she writes the story with such zeal that the reader is generally, from the very beginning and towards the end also, he is reading the story with same motivation and same zeal. These kind of stories she has been writing. So let's go on to the lesson now. Poor George. George hated school. It wasn't that his teachers were that bad. Actually, they tried their best with George. It was that he was uninterested in practically everything related to school. I would rather draw or play baseball anyway, he would mutter. So George hated to go to school. It was not that his teachers were bad, but they were also trying their level best to make him study. They motivated him, they encouraged him all the time to make him study, but George was not at all interested in his school itself. He would like to draw or play baseball. He would mutter to himself. Mutter means he slowly told himself like that he was very good at drawing or playing, but he didn't want to go to school to study. Last open house, George waited for his mom and dad to return home so he could hear the reports his teacher gave about him. George, all your teachers say the same thing, his father stated firmly. You just don't put enough efforts into your subjects. George, you could do a lot better if you tried harder. So it was last open house. That means it was kind of a parent-teacher meeting they had in their school, and George's parents had gone for the PTM, and George was waiting at home to hear from them what was his report. And as usual, his parents came home and his father said that George, you don't ever put good efforts into your studies. You are not putting enough efforts which are required to study into your subjects, and you can do much better if you try harder. So this was the thing that he has been hearing for long, but it doesn't affect him because anyhow he has lost his interest in studies. Poor George, he did try. Dad didn't know how much he tried. School stuff just didn't come easy like it did for his older sister, Jill. That was another problem. Every teacher who discovered that Jill was George's sister said the same thing. Now there was a comparison. As you know, children, that if you have a brother or sister in school and if he is much better than you in studies, generally what happens, you get compared with that sibling of yours, your friend or your brother or sister. If she is good in studies, so everybody will say that your sister is studying so well and you are not doing well. That is what was the case with George also, that George was not at all good in studies, whereas his elder sister was much good in studies, and that was a comparison that usually took place in his school. Every teacher used to say that, George, see how good is your sister Jill and you are not at all studying. What a lovely girl, a wonderful student. She never gave me a bit of trouble. Let's face it, I'll always be a terrible student, George thought. Now every teacher used to say, what a lovely girl, what a wonderful student, and she has never given us any trouble, any problem. So George used to say on this that, let's face it, that I am going to be a terrible student. I am not at all a good student and I am going to be like this. So he has accepted the fact that he was not at all good in studies and he is going to be like that. He is not going to improve on it. So well, it was during spring that things took a turn for the better for poor George. Every year, the 7th graders put on an Easter performance, singing, dancing, and reciting poetry. A photographer usually appeared on the opening day and took pictures for the local newspaper. So what happened one spring, that there was they used to have a kind of function in the school, and 7th graders put on an Easter performance. So Easter is a kind of festival which is celebrated in that country with a lot of zeal and enthusiasm. So in that, children used to perform singing, dancing, and reciting poetry, etc. A photographer also comes and he clicks all the photographs of the children, and they are generally published in the local newspaper. So it was a kind of quite a good function. As usual, George was doodling his little drawings while Mrs. Jima was choosing students for various activities in the show. So in the class, George was just doodling. What he was doodling, he was just busy in doing some drawings in his notebook, while Mrs. Jima, the teacher, she was selecting students for the various activity. Those will be participating in that function. So this is boring, thought George as he escaped into his world of cartoons. He was so deep in his daydreams that he didn't notice that Mrs. Jima was standing directly in front of him. Oh, he whispered to himself. So George was just doing, he was just busy in his own drawings. He was not even looking what was happening in the class. He was not at all interested as such. So he didn't even notice, he was so much lost in his own world that he didn't notice that Mrs. Jima was just standing in front of him. She took away his drawing and said firmly, George, see me after the class. So what Mrs. Jima did, Mrs. Jima took away the drawings which George was doing, and she said to him firmly that you come and meet me after the class. As the bell rang for lunch, everyone filed out, everyone except poor George. He walked slowly up to his teacher's desk, wondering what his punishment would be. Mrs. Jima's response was a surprise. So as the bell rang for lunch, every child was very happy, as you people become. So they all ran away with their lunch and all that. But George was very sad and upset, and he was just thinking in his mind that what is going to happen now, because Mrs. Jima is going to scold him or punish him because he was not attentive in her class. George Richmond, do not doodle during class again. You know my feelings about that. I am surprised at you. Now these drawings show me that you are quite an artist. You are going to use your talent in the Easter show. Would you like to be in charge of all the scenery, artwork, staging, and George? So Mrs. Jima's response was altogether different from what George has thought of. So she said that please don't do these kind of drawings in my class when I am there in the class. So I am going to use your talent in the Easter show. Would you like to be in charge of all the scenery, artwork, and staging? She asked George. Now she said to George that you have a talent of drawing. I am going to use this drawing, your talent of drawing, in the Easter show. So would you like to be in charge of all the scenery and the artwork? Wow, he couldn't believe Mrs. Jima wanted him to do all of that by himself. What fun. The ideas were already flooding his brain. Finally, George had the chance to really prove that he could do. George, if you really want to do it, I could pick another student. No, I do, Mrs. Jima. I'll get right to work. So when Mrs. Jima said that you are going to do the drawings of all the functions, you will be in charge of all the artwork, he became very happy. He became very excited. All the ideas already starting flooding his brain, because he was very good at drawing and he could draw very well, and that was an opportunity for him to show something to the world, to the people, to his classmates, to the teacher, that he can do something. No, I do, Mrs. Jima. So if Mrs. Jima asked him, if you don't want, then we can take somebody else. But he said, no, I will just do this work. I'll get right to work. As George rather clumsily left the classroom, tripping over the basket, first Mrs. Jima smiled broadly. She knew this would give her unmotivated student the confidence and the recognition he desperately needed. Now Mrs. Jima understood that this was it which George was looking for. He wanted that he should be recognized. People should recognize his talent. People should know that he can do this kind of a thing. He had a talent of drawing, and this was the chance he was looking for, and which Mrs. Jima has already given him. And George was so excited that he had already tripped over the waste basket first, and he smiled broadly and he ran to get back to his work. So this is the first part of the story. I'll finish up here with the first part. In the next video you can see, in the part 2 you can hear the next explanation of the part 2 of this lesson. Thank you.